Now, I think China has a lot of experiences to offer when it comes to tackling poverty. But China's method is, I mean, it's targeted and it's from the bottom up. Um, like literally down to the village, the county, and even the household level to see what the local resources, has to offer, what kind of culture it has, what the family, what's like the target, basically custom made plans for poverty alleviation. And I have actually some numbers here. It's from ChinaFocus.com in a conversation with Mrs. Beat Trankman, UNDP resident representative in China. She said since 2017, about 775,000 civil servants has been sent to all the registered poor villages to support the local authorities in implementing these measures to reduce poverty and also to monitor its progress. So I'm wondering, even with, let's say the funding is in place, will there be enough human resource to actually put the money into good use? Because I think for China, that's a huge part of why it has worked
over the
Yeah,
decades.
so it's a good question, and such capacity needs to be developed over time. It wasn't in place starting in 1980 or 85. A lot was developed over this 40-year period of massive reduction of poverty. But the reduction of poverty in China came in many different ways. Partly was general economic orientation. When Deng Xiaoping said we should be an open economy and have market economy and so forth, this was a general system design. So that was one thing. Then the government invested very heavily in the basic infrastructure, tens of thousands of kilometers of paved roads and highways, an intercity fast rail system of tens of thousands of kilometers built in the 1990s. In many urban centers, a metro system or public transport system was built. The power grid was built. The digital grid was built, mostly by state enterprises or direct public investment, sometimes also by private investors in certain cases, like parts of the digital system. But the basic point was huge investments of infrastructure. Then came huge public investments in education. The years of schooling went up a lot, especially in rural areas. Higher education was, of course, really fostered. The healthcare system was very rudimentary in 1980, the barefoot doctors in the villages. And there was a over 40-year period building a quite complicated healthcare system. So a lot of those big investments were taken. Then, of course, the business environment was favorable, the globalization, the rapid economic growth, all of that contributed to rising incomes and livelihoods. So you had the government side, you had the private side, and then the poverty rates came down significantly. And then the government said, we're going to go to zero by 2020. And I was involved a little bit in some of the efforts, for example, in the Western China development efforts, because it was noticed in the early years of the new century, the 21st century, that while the opening up had really worked to propel China, the big gains were in the coastal regions. And the Western regions were lagging. So they said, Professor Sachs, could you go visit Western China during a couple of years and make recommendations? And this is one of the things I was very happy to do roughly 20 years ago. But it means that there was lots of fine tuning. And especially in the 2010s, the fine tuning was, like you said, really down to the local level. In fact, I went to what was counted as one of the poorest counties of the country, Ningxia Autonomous Region, with an anti-poverty mission during the 2010s. And it was very specific. They knew each household and what were the problems, and we went household to household with the local the local officials. By the way, there was still poverty, but it was at a level much above the poverty that I knew in Africa, because we'd go to the small house of an elderly woman, and she had electricity and a television set. So it was already at a level beyond extreme poverty. All of this is to say that the reduction of poverty in China was a 40-year-long process. Absolutely remarkable, because roughly 1 billion people came out of poverty. And that's an unprecedented historical accomplishment. But many things went into it. And it wasn't just 1 year, it was 2 generations of rapid progress, but over 40 years. And so when I think about Africa, I'm also thinking about a 40-year process. And I often say, learn from China's experience, develop the cadres that you need to do this, develop the planning mechanisms that you need to do this, connect with the Belt and Road Initiative for some financing of the long-term infrastructure. But the answer to your question is yes, of course, those skills are needed, but they don't have to be there at the beginning. They get developed along the way.
Could I add one last question? Baby's gonna. We really wanted to talk to you. We've been both of us are overeager. Sorry, Dr. Sachs, for taking so much of your time. We are the bridge, and we do hope to connect, the West. I'm sorry that we have to use that term, with our Chinese audience also. And I was wondering, are you hopeful that the United States and China can work together in some of these global partnerships to alleviate poverty around the world?
Of course, we should work together, and I want to see some real projects of working together. For example, China and the US and Europe should say to leaders in Africa, especially of the African Union, we'll help you. You have to do the lead, but we'll help you on universal access to digital services, universal access to electrification, kids in school, and so forth. And if this was viewed not as some great struggle between the US and China over influence, but rather as a cooperative activity, it would be fantastic. And I have some specific projects in mind that I'm really trying to emphasize. One that is a famous project called Grand Inga, which is on the lower Congo River, a massive hydroelectric power potential for the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is a country of almost 100 million people, but the vast majority don't have electricity. And here's this great hydropower potential that could provide electrification. And it's a pretty big price tag, $30 to $50 billion investment to get 30 to 50 gigawatts of hydropower. Roughly, rough numbers. Big potential. Yeah. But, for an impoverished country, it's too much. And so I recommended, let's mobilize a global development project. It will repay, by the way, because the electricity will really generate economic development. But you need some backers to that. And that's a kind of project where the US, Europe, and China really could work together effectively.